Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Ethics of Singerhood, the Rock Vox pod, where we have real talk about what it means to actually be a singer and all the truths that nobody warned us about. My name's Rachel. I'm a professional singer and a voice coach here in Seattle, Washington, founder and owner of Rock Vox and the Rock Vox pod. And today we have episode 3, The Myth of Muscle Memory. Today we are talking about auditory perception. Have you ever had to sing somewhere that you can't hear yourself? Well, I have, and it's not only horrible, but it sets you up for total failure. This episode is for all the dedicated, sweet, sweet peaches out there that have ever told you or me to just sing louder or to use muscle memory. Kindly shut up. All right, let's get into it. This is a common phrase I hear all the time in rehearsals, in performances, and all kinds of different things. If you've ever been in this position where you're singing and you're like, hey, can't hear myself, can we turn up my mic? Can we get a new mix in the in-ears? Whatever it is. And the sound engineer or your bandmates tell you, why don't you just sing louder? Or why can't you just use your muscle memory? You practiced, right? Here's the deal. This is not only impossible, but it grossly oversimplifies what's happening in the brain and the body when you are singing, phonating, pouring your heart and soul out on a stage or into a mic or whatever it is. Section 1. Here we go. Internal versus external dichotomy. Internal hearing is called bone conduction. Everybody say it with me. Bone conduction. Bone conduction 101, or why you hear yourself differently than anybody else does. Bone conduction is the transmission of sound vibrations through the bones of your skull directly into your inner ear, bypassing the outer and middle ear. How this works is when you speak or sing, the vocal folds create vibration. And these travel two ways: air conduction and bone conduction. Air conduction is, you guessed it, through the air. It's how you hear what everyone else hears. So I'm not only hearing what I'm speaking right now through the air coming back into my ear, but I'm also hearing it through my bones, hearing it through my bones. Bone conduction, air conduction. Bone conduction emphasizes lower frequencies, which is why your voice sounds fuller, deeper, warmer to you when you talk or sing. Why does this matter for singers? First of all, there's a mismatch. What you hear internally is different from what others hear externally. There's a bit of a confidence trap. Some singers get thrown off by recordings or monitors because the sound doesn't match the bone conduction version. Over relying on your internal sound can cause issues, like pushing for warmth that you think you're missing. In addition to this, if you're playing with a loud band and you cannot hear yourself, this opens up a world of incorrect pitches. Not because you're bad, not because you're untrained, not because you don't know what you're doing, but because you can't hear what you're singing. Are you following? Any questions? Do we understand? Learning to trust recordings, resonance sensation, and teacher feedback helps bridge those gaps, but they are not a substitute for not being able to hear yourself. Fun fact, bone conduction is why your voice sounds weird to you or why you hate listening back to it. The bassy resonance is gone, leaving a thinner, brighter version that's closer to how everyone else hears it. In fact, I have this dissonance quite often, and when I first started singing in recordings, it was so painful to listen to myself back because I trained in musical theater, which has a bit of a brighter kind of like pingier, almost like, I'm going to use the word annoying, not a judgment, like annoying sound. That being said, the musical theater style was originally kind of embraced to make the sound more brighter and cutting so that you could cut through a huge house before there was microphones. So that's kind of how I started hearing myself when I was recording, and I was like, what? I thought I had this giant big rich belty sound, but I don't. And people would be like, yeah, you sound musical theatery. And for the longest time I didn't really think that that was much of a compliment, which is a crying shame because getting that technique down is hard. But through listening to myself and practicing and recording myself sing and listening back to rehearsals, I've been able to develop a sound that I'm actually trying to make instead of the dissonance between what I hear myself singing and speaking every day, all the time, forever and ever, versus the recorded version of me. So, not only is there a bit of a disconnect between the internal and external hearing, the dissonance between that can be really jarring when you're in a performance. So, all that being said, sing louder, not really going to help if you're behind a bunch of amps and monitors and stuff, or in front of, or being faced with all that kind of like amplified sound. Section 2, this one's for science. Now we're going to learn about the Fletcher-Munson curve and equal loudness contours. Something that I am still learning about. So in the 1930s, Harvey Fletcher and Weldon A. Munson at Bell Labs researched how humans perceive loudness at different frequencies. The key finding is that our ears don't hear all frequencies equally. Loudness depends on frequency and volume level. What does it mean? What does it mean? What does it mean? At low volumes, we are less sensitive to bass and treble. So bass is the low frequency, treble is the high frequencies. In the mid-range, around 1 to 5 kilohertz, where speech sits approximately, feels a little bit louder. At higher volumes, the ears flatten out and bass and treble catch up. So the practical takeaway here is that a note sung at the same decibel level, but in a different range, might feel or sound louder or softer just because of how our ears perceive it. Which brings me to section number 3. What is the role of auditory feedback? Well, the first one is pitch accuracy. It's pitch accuracy. Staying in tune relies on being able to hear yourself and adjusting in real time, not with, quote, muscle memory. Vocal folds? Not a muscle. Sorry. Auditory feedback also plays into technique development. Breath management, resonance, pitch integrity all require feedback loops with your ears. Auditory feedback also fuels your expression and artistry. Shocking, I know. Vibrato, dynamics, tone nuance, all depend on how you hear yourself moment to moment. Shocking again, the role of auditory feedback contributes to learning. Learning and growth. Beginners especially rely on auditory correction to build strong habits. And finally, performance and monitoring. If you think the last show that you saw in a big venue with higher paid musicians and touring bands don't rely on auditory perception and feedback in their in-ears and their monitors, you'd be mistaken, actually. People create careers out of making sure that musicians can hear themselves while they're on stage. Crazy, right? And if you've ever chatted with me after a show, you know, usually my number one beef is I couldn't hear myself, which is why I decided to spend $500 on in-ear monitors. Crazy thing, in-ear monitors are wildly useful when they are correctly mixed and set up, and when they're not, that's like expert mode. That's expert mode right there, trying to figure out how to be on pitch when not only can you not hear yourself, but now you can only hear the guitar, or you can't hear the guitar and somehow you only can hear bass, or somehow you can only hear the drums. Drums do not give pitches. They don't do that. So here we are. Why is muscle memory misleading and incorrect? Muscles repeat actions, yes, but singing is a neuro-auditory skill, not just a physical one. Without auditory feedback, muscle memory quickly fails. Ever sang with blocked ears while you're sick? Or have you ever sang with monitors that are facing the opposite direction? Doesn't work. Doesn't work. True skill, if you will, is coordination of muscle, your ear, and your brain, and your nervous system. It's a somatic experience, folks. I've said it once, I'll say it again. So what are the key takeaways? Singing is not just a set it and forget it mechanism. In fact, it takes about only 2-ish weeks to really get out of practice, which is a big bummer for those of us who get sick and can't sing for sometimes longer than that. But it really does only take a short period of time to get out of practice to need to brush up on your technique. It is something that needs to be taken care of every day. If you're dead ass about it, every day is the time to do it. And the consistency. The myth of muscle memory limits how we think about growth. It also limits how we think about singing and singers that are in our orbit. This podcast and this information isn't just for singers. It's definitely useful for singers, hopefully, but it's also for all your other musician friends. It's good to understand how things work if you're a singer, to understand how musicians who only play instruments work, or vice versa. I just had a great hammock chat with my good friend Ray, and I asked her, you know, when it comes to auditory perception and you're playing piano or playing guitar or drums or whatever it is, maybe less so drums. Drums are always the loudest. You can always hear the drums. Um, I just asked her what her take was and how she adjusts if she's not singing and just playing piano. And she mentioned to me that, similar to singing, that if you're playing a piano on stage and you can't hear the piano, then it's going to affect the dynamics of your playing. And again, your artistry, it affects the way that you deliver the music. Um, but the key difference we kind of ran into was with singing, you're overcompensating for something. And with piano too, or guitar, or what have you, you do have to overcompensate, or sometimes your body, your brain, your nerves overcompensate by potentially rushing or hitting the keys harder or strumming louder, and it definitely creates a a performance that maybe you didn't practice. That's not what you wanted it to be. Back to singing, usually what happens is if you can't hear yourself, you naturally try to push and sing louder. And there's a volume knob, but it's not very wide of range. And you get to a point where you're overcompensating, you're straining, and your system is not able to work efficiently. And efficiency is the dream. Efficiency is the goal. If you can sing efficiently, then your artistry comes through, your technique comes through, everything that you've been practicing for and with has a better chance of connecting with the audience. That's why we do it. But when you're overcompensating because you can't hear yourself, that's when we get injuries. That's when we get pushing. That's when we get bad habits. That's when we, push our technique back 7 steps. So, although it is a shared experience between people who play and share music in loud music venues or poorly monitored spaces, it is important for singers to understand this, and more so, not more so, but and also people who are working with singers. I recently saw what was it? Maybe it was a TikTok or a reel that I shared up on my Instagram. Um, and it was this man speaking about how singers going to jams in LA, which is a place that I'm not, and something that I have not experienced in this way. He was talking about how singers going to jams and scatting with like jazz jams or whatever um, are looked down upon for not being exactly perfect the right time, or um, maybe not feeling as comfortable in the situation. But he made a really good point that singers have every right to be in the space, in the room like that. Sharing your voice is the most human thing that you can do, and it brings humanity to the music. Now, there's obviously lots of music that does not have the voice that is also beautiful and very human. That being said, when you are a singer, it is your essence that you're sharing. It is your literal, your voice in a literal sense, which is not quite the same as like a guitar voicing or piano voicings. It's your essence, it's your artistry, it's your humanity that you're sharing and performing. So the setup is going to look a little bit different, and you're not a diva for asking for better sound, and you're not demanding or bossy for saying, "Hey, can we check this mic again? Can we focus on my in-ears for a second?" It is well within your authority and range to say, "My body is my instrument, and in order to take care of it and have longevity, this is what I need." And you know what? I'll say that until the cows come home. Okay? Not only is it important to advocate for yourself, but kind of bring it back to why you're doing it in the first place. I loved hearing the singers, the voices, they bring the humanity to the music. That's beautiful. That's beautiful. um and I totally agree with it. So your humanity, your essence is being expressed through this way, and to be supported auditorily is to be loved. So um I don't think you should ever feel ashamed to ask for what you need. I think, especially in professional settings, that's why it's so important to have sound checks. That's why it's so important to trust your sound engineers, because ultimately, all of the little details here come down to one thing, and that is the product that you're selling. And the product you're selling, while literally it is the songs and the music, it is a feeling. You're selling a feeling here. Whenever you perform, you're telling the story. And if you can't tell the story in the way that you've rehearsed, in the way that you've practiced, in the way that is authentic to you, then it's almost like, I don't know, like ordering your freaking toothbrush on Amazon and the package is punctured. Like, you can't trust that. Maybe it's not like that, but you get the gist of what I'm saying. Telling your story often comes at the end of this long road of training, coordinating, planning, organizing, paying, promoting, advertising, publicity, photo shoots. And so I do feel like, of all of the things that you're doing for yourself, for this product, for this show, for this performance, it is good to be able to advocate for yourself in that way, which I've had to learn. And also, it's good for the people who surround you to have reverence for what you're doing. And I would say the same thing for guitar players. I'd say the same thing for bassists. I would say the same thing for any musician. Alas, I am a singer, and I will speak on behalf of the singers. Thank you. So the myth is that you can use muscle memory. You can't. The truth is, success comes from training your ears as much as training your muscles. And in this case, you do have to be able to hear in order to do that. So while we debunk this muscle memory myth for singers, we also need to be creating reliable performance habits. And this is the whole reason I started this podcast, is to start having these conversations in places where these conversations did not exist. People blowing out their voices at performances because they couldn't hear themselves. Maybe they were too scared to ask. Maybe they don't know about in-ear monitoring. Maybe they don't understand that, okay, while so and so is saying they're using muscle memory to do this performance, I am unable to do that, and I can't hear what I'm singing. And maybe this guy's just performing right in front of the monitor. Maybe he or she can hear what they're singing. You're not crazy. The iPhone videos that come back after performances are also going to sound different from what your in-ears heard, from what the mixing board heard, from what the professional recording that you paid for heard. It's all different. It's all different, and it doesn't mean that you're bad. It doesn't mean that you don't know what you're doing. It means the circumstances have changed, and auditory perception is real for both devices and for human ears. So don't let it get you down. Advocate for yourself. Have these conversations with your friends. Have these conversations with the sound person running the show. Get there early, have all your gear prepared, do everything in your power so that you can have a great show and tell your story. Tell your story, okay? Thank you so much. This has been episode 3 of The Ethics of Singerhood, myth busting muscle memory, and I couldn't be happier to be having this conversation. If you have questions, if you have comments, if you have corrections, if you have a story you want to share, please reach out. Please send me an email, send me a DM, whatever it is. I love talking about this. I literally love talking about it so much that I set up my camera and I talk to myself about it because I'm so interested and I think it's so fascinating. Make sure you follow the Rockvox Instagram. Check out the website. I have all of the podcasts posted. Share it with your friends. Share it with your mom. Anyone can have the conversation. Anyone can learn something new. And it's beautiful to share these things in the great state of Washington, in the beautiful, beautiful city of Seattle. Before we go, I do want to say I personally, professionally, am a singer in this area, and my stage name is Ives. and I'm releasing a single on November 7th. That's in 7 days from this drop. Um, if you love Rock Fox, you'll probably love Ives. She's badass. She's heavy pop. She's unstoppable. There's two sides of me. There's Rachel and there's Ives. So if you like what you hear here, and if you've ever been in the room with me or taken a lesson or seen an Ives show, please follow, please like, please give a comment, whatever feels best to you. I'm a friendly girl, and I love to chat about singing. So once again, thank you for listening, and I can't wait to share all the rest of the episodes I have planned because it's going to be insane. Keep singing. I love ya. I'll talk to you soon. All right. Bye.